The studio went completely silent. Dr. Phil McGraw dropped his microphone to his side and raised his hand toward the cameras. "Stop the tape," he said, his voice low but firm. The production crew froze. The audience, packed into rows of seats under the warm studio lights, held their collective breath, because 40 years of marriage had just ended with one sentence. And what that woman said in front of millions changed everything. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this, not on live television. But when the truth has been buried for 4 decades, sometimes it doesn't wait for permission to surface. It explodes. And Dr. Phil, who has spent over 2 decades helping families navigate their darkest moments, knew immediately that what he was witnessing wasn't just another marital conflict. It was a reckoning. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand how we arrived at this devastating moment, you need to know who Barbara and Richard were before they sat in those chairs. Barbara Jenkins was 63 years old when she walked onto the Dr. Phil stage. She wore a simple gray cardigan over a floral blouse, her silver hair pulled back in a knee bun. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone clip to her collar. Beside her sat Richard, her husband of 40 years. He was 65, dressed in a button-down shirt and khakis, his reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. To anyone watching, they looked like the kind of couple you'd see at a Sunday church service or a neighborhood barbecue. Stable, comfortable, safe. But Barbara had written to Dr. Phil 3 months earlier with a letter that made his production team pause. "I've been living a lie for 40 years, she wrote, "and I don't know how to tell him the truth." The show reached out immediately. They flew Barbara and Richard from their small town in Ohio to Los Angeles. They put them up in a hotel. They prepared them for the taping. But what nobody knew, not even Dr. Phil's team, was the specific nature of Barbara's secret. She'd kept it vague in her correspondence. "You'll understand when I say it," she told the producer during the pre-in. "But I can't practice it. I can only say it once." The cameras rolled. Dr. Phil opened the segment with his trademark directness. "Barbara, you've been married to Richard for 4 decades. You raised 3 children together. You've built a life. But you wrote to me saying you've been living a lie. What does that mean?" Barbara looked at Richard. Her eyes were already wet. Richard reached over and took her hand, a gesture so automatic it seemed like muscle memory. "It's okay, Barb," he said softly. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." He smiled at her. That smile, so full of trust and reassurance, would haunt the footage forever. Dr. Phil leaned forward in his chair. "Barbara, take your time, but I need you to be honest. Not just with Richard, not just with this audience, but with yourself. What is the truth you've been carrying?" Barbara took a breath. Her hand tightened around Richard's. The studio lights felt hotter. The audience was so quiet, you could hear the faint hum of the cameras. And then she said it. "I never loved you." 5 words, 40 years, 1 sentence. Richard's face didn't change immediately. It was as if his brain needed a moment to process what his ears had just heard. His mouth opened slightly. His hand, still holding hers, went limp. The audience gasped. Someone in the back row whispered, "Oh my God." Dr. Phil's expression shifted from professional calm to genuine shock. He straightened in his chair, his eyes locked on Barbara. "Say that again," Dr. Phil said, his voice barely above a whisper. Barbara's tears spilled over. "I never loved you, Richard. Not the way a wife should love a husband. I tried, I really tried, but I didn't. I don't. I never have. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Richard pulled his hand away. He stared at her like she was a stranger. "What are you talking about?" His voice cracked. "Barbara, we've been married for 40 years. We have 3 kids. We have grandchildren. What do you mean you never loved me?" Dr. Phil stood up. He walked to the small table between them and picked up a worn envelope that had been sitting there the entire time. Barbara had brought it with her. Inside was a letter she'd written to herself on her wedding day in 1984. The production team had no idea what it contained. Neither did Richard. Dr. Phil held the envelope but didn't open it. "Barbara, is this letter connected to what you just said?" She nodded. "I wrote it the morning of our wedding. I was 23 years old. I was standing in my parents' house in my wedding dress, and I knew I was making a mistake, but I didn't know how to stop it. Everyone was so happy. My parents, his parents, our friends, the church was decorated, the reception was paid for, and Richard was so kind. He was so good to me. So I told myself that love would come later, that I just needed time, that marriage would make me feel what I was supposed to feel." Richard's hands were shaking now. "You married me knowing you didn't love me?" "I thought I could learn to love you," Barbara whispered. "I thought if I just tried hard enough, if I was a good wife, if I gave you children, if I built a life with you, that the love would come. But it never did. And I'm so sorry, Richard. I'm so sorry." The audience was silent. Some were crying. Dr. Phil sat back down, his jaw tight. He looked at Richard, whose face had gone pale. "Richard," Dr. Phil said gently, "what are you feeling right now?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He stared at the floor. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "I don't understand. 40 years, 3 kids, grandchildren, holidays, vacations. Every night we went to bed together. Every morning we woke up together. And you're telling me none of it was real?" "It was real," Barbara said quickly. "Our life was real. Our children are real. The memories are real. But my feelings, Richard, my feelings weren't what they should have been. I cared about you. I respected you. I wanted you to be happy. But I wasn't in love with you. And I think deep down, you knew that, didn't you?" Richard looked up at her. His eyes were red. "No," he said. "I didn't know. I thought we were happy." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He set the envelope down and turned to the audience. "I've been doing this show for over 20 years, he said. "I've seen marriages end for a lot of reasons. Infidelity, abuse, addiction, financial ruin. But this, what we're witnessing right here, is something different. This is a woman who spent 40 years trying to become someone she wasn't. And this is a man who built his entire life on a foundation he didn't know was false." He turned back to Barbara and Richard.
"This isn't just about love. This is about identity. This is about truth. And it's about the cost of living a lie." Barbara reached for the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. Dr. Phil helped her. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowed with age. Barbara unfolded it and read aloud, her voice breaking with every word. "To the woman I'll be 40 years from now. If you're reading this, it means you made it. It means you survived. But I need you to ask yourself, was it worth it? Did you ever feel the love you pretended to feel? Did he ever know the truth? And if he didn't, what kind of life did you give him? I'm standing here in my wedding dress, and I'm terrified. Not of marriage, not of Richard, but of myself, because I know I'm about to lie, and I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to stop. Forgive me or don't, but please, someday, tell the truth." The letter fell from her hands. Richard picked it up. He read it again, his lips moving silently. When he finished, he set it down on the table and stood up. He didn't look at Barbara. He didn't look at Dr. Phil. He walked off the stage. The cameras followed him as he disappeared behind the curtain into the backstage area. The audience didn't know what to do. Some stood up, others stayed seated, frozen. Dr. Phil turned to one of the producers standing off camera. "Bring him back," he said. "Don't let him leave the building. I need to talk to him." He looked at Barbara, who was sobbing into her hands. "Barbara, stay here. We're not done." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He walked backstage himself. The cameras weren't allowed to follow, but the microphones picked up fragments of the conversation. Dr. Phil found Richard sitting on a folding chair in a hallway, his head in his hands. "Richard," Dr. Phil said, his voice soft but steady, "I know you want to run. I know every instinct in your body is telling you to get out of here. But if you leave now, you'll never get the answers you need, and she'll never get the chance to explain why she finally told you." Richard looked up. His face was streaked with tears. "What's there to explain, Dr. Phil? She lied to me for 40 years. She married me knowing she didn't love me. She let me believe we had something we never had. How do I come back from that?" "You don't come back from it," Dr. Phil said. "You move forward from it. But you can't do that until you understand what drove her to do this. Not to excuse it, not to justify it, but to understand it. Because right now, all you have is anger and pain, and those will eat you alive if you don't process them." Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up. "Okay, I'll go back, but I need you to promise me something." "What?" "I need you to help me figure out if any of it was real. Because if none of it was, I don't know how to keep living." Dr. Phil put a hand on Richard's shoulder. "We'll figure it out together." They walked back onto the stage. The audience erupted in quiet murmurs. Barbara looked up, her face swollen from crying. Richard sat back down in his chair, but this time he didn't reach for her hand. He sat with his arms crossed, his body angled slightly away from her. Dr. Phil addressed the audience. "What you're witnessing here is the collision of two truths. Barbara's truth is that she's been living inauthentically for 40 decades. Richard's truth is that his entire life as he understood it just collapsed. Both truths are valid. Both truths are painful. And both truths need to be honored if there's any chance of healing." He turned to Barbara. "Why now? After 40 years, why are you telling him this now?" Barbara wiped her eyes. "Because I'm dying." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Richard's head snapped up. "What?" "I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 6 months ago," Barbara said. "The doctors gave me a year, maybe less. And I realized I couldn't die with this secret. I couldn't leave him thinking we had something we didn't. He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to spend whatever time he has left after I'm gone building a life that's real, not one built on my lie." Richard's face crumpled. He covered his mouth with his hand. The audience was openly crying now. Dr. Phil sat down heavily in his chair. "Barbara, do your children know? About the cancer? Yes. About this? No. They think I'm here to talk about end-of-life planning. They don't know what I was going to say." Dr. Phil looked at Richard. "Do you understand what she's trying to do?" Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "She's trying to set me free, but what she doesn't understand is that she's also destroying me. But what happened next is something no one in the room or watching at home saw coming." Dr. Phil stood up again. He walked over to Richard and knelt down beside his chair. "Richard, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. In 40 years of marriage, did you ever question whether Barbara loved you?" Richard hesitated. "Yes." The admission seemed to surprise even him. He continued, his voice shaking. "There were times when I felt like she was going through the motions, like she was performing the role of a wife instead of being one. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that she was just tired or stressed or that I was expecting too much. I never let myself believe that she didn't love me. Because if I believed that, then what did that make me? A fool? A man who wasted his life on someone who didn't want him?" Dr. Phil nodded. "So part of you knew, you just didn't want to face it." "I guess so." Dr. Phil stood up and addressed the audience again. "This is what unspoken truth does. It doesn't just hurt the person keeping the secret. It seeps into the other person's subconscious. It creates doubt, it creates distance, and over time, it creates a relationship that exists in two different realities. Barbara was living in the reality of her secret. Richard was living in the reality of his denial, and both of them were suffering." He turned to Barbara. "What do you need from Richard right now?" "Forgiveness," she whispered. "I need him to know that even though I couldn't love him the way he deserved, I never wanted to hurt him, and I need him to live fully after I'm gone." Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. He held it in his palm, staring at it. The audience held its breath. Dr. Phil didn't move. "I can't forgive you right now," Richard said quietly. "Maybe someday, but not today." He paused. "But I won't let you die thinking you destroyed me completely. Because you didn't. You gave me 3 beautiful children. You gave me grandchildren. You gave me a life that, even if it wasn't what I thought it was, still had meaning. And I hold on to that. Not for you, for me." He placed the ring on the table between them, not as an act of anger, but as an act of release. Dr. Phil stood between them one last time. This story doesn't have a happy ending, but it has an honest one. And sometimes honesty is the only gift we can give each other when everything else is gone. The camera stopped rolling, but the impact of what happened in that studio would be felt long after the lights went down. Because 40 years of marriage didn't end with shouting or hatred. It ended with the hardest truth anyone can speak. I tried to love you, but I couldn't. And now we both have to live with that. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dr. Phil walked off the stage that day carrying something heavier than he'd carried in years. Not just the weight of Barbara's confession or Richard's pain, but the reminder that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it destroys everything. And sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is survive that truth and choose to keep living anyway. The envelope, the letter, and the ring remained on that table long after the taping ended. 3 objects that told the story of a marriage built on hope, sustained by denial, and ended by the one thing neither of them could outrun: the truth.